1267th day of the war. The breakthrough of Russian soldiers on the Pokrovsk direction, apparently, is not quite a breakthrough. New details appear that indicate that it is more about the infiltration, which is also good, not that it can judge the crisis. However, everything is not as bad as it was evaluated in the days. Also, Ukrainian military hinted at the stabilization of the situation. Analysts discuss how the Russians, in principle, got it all. Spoiler: all the case is in the lack of a personnel of the defense forces and a new Russian tactic of infiltration. At the same time, the situation in Sumy has significantly improved and stabilized the Zaporizhzhia region. Apparently, before meeting with Trump, the Kremlin wanted some significant results and made all the efforts specifically toward the Donetsk direction. While the significant results are not yet clear, although the risks due to the Russian armed forces slip-up have increased, the meeting of Putin and Trump will take place at the American military base, reports the CNN. 2 days remain until then, but its conditions are getting more and more fantastic. I'm not even talking about the essence of what the Russian president will say to Trump, but about the conditions of the meeting itself. That is, an admirer of quarantines, bunkers, and absolutely all security measures in the world, Vladimir Putin will not just go to the United States, but directly to the American military base. Trump will also conduct a video meeting with Vladimir Zelensky today, and they are again moving to the group of tense people, mostly due to public foreign policy polemics. Trump says he's crowing Ukrainian territory to shelter a friend from the Kremlin. Zelensky emphasizes this won't happen, so I'm not waiting for anything special from this video, but things happen, we'll see. Meanwhile, Ukrainian strikes are not stopping in the depths of Russia. At night, another 2 oil refineries were attacked. Meanwhile, a recent oil refinery was attacked and stopped, deepening the crisis of Russia with oil refining. Ukraine also leaves the Gur drones alone. They came to the Zaporizhzhia plant in Orenburg, as well as the second time in a week they flew over the Shahed warehouse in Tatarstan. Moreover, Ukrainian Shahed-like drones of this kind have already taken part there. Zelensky voiced Russian-Ukrainian losses, which were 3-1. Only on August 11, the Russians lost almost 1,000 killed and wounded, the Ukrainians 340. At the same time, the number of Russian fighters is more than 300, a sign of a full failure of the evacuation, which the Z channels used to talk about. For the Ukrainian Defense Force, this indicator is usually 1 to 3 for such conflicts of relations, although such numbers are a feat itself in the conditions of war of drones. Russian contractors are going to war to die and leave the money to the family. Of course, there is little point from them, but the statistics of the set of volunteerism are improving. It is not surprising that the wounded military are considered to be worked out by material and are alive in the lighthouses. All this and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions. They are important for YouTube algorithms. You can also support the channel financially. You can do this by subscribing to Patreon, the link is in the description, and buying NVPN. This is a means to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. Now there is some kind of voice call which began to move, which, well, Sobchak reports, Kashvarov reports that all decisions about the prohibition of video calls in WhatsApp and in Telegram are already accepted by the Russian authorities. In short, without VPN, it is not possible. If you want a reliable and high-quality VPN, for which I volunteer, then NVPN, the link is in the description. In Russia, the purchase of VPNs and their use still remains legal. The conversation continues about Trump and Putin meeting in Alaska because there's nothing more to discuss on the external track. Trump will go to Anchorage to meet with Vladimir Putin in the morning of Friday, August 15, confirmed the press secretary of the White House, Caroline Leavitt, during the briefing. Leavitt also made the following statement: the meeting will become an opportunity for the American president to listen to Putin. Trump hopes that the three-way meeting with Vladimir Zelensky may take place in the future. Trump also said that perhaps there are planned visits to Russia in the future, she also said. Meanwhile, Zelensky, speaking of possible negotiations, significantly against the two-way format of the meeting between the US and Russia without the help of Ukraine. The Ukrainian leader expressed his belief that any negotiations about the future of the country should take place in the three-way format, because without Ukraine's help, they won't have real forces. The president warned that two-way meetings of Trump and Putin could be played on the hand of the Russian side, because Putin's goal is to simply get a photo with the American leader and leave international isolation. In the background of the lack of serious news about the negotiations, some outlets are starting to beep them out of their finger. Here's an example. Ukraine is ready to give up already occupied territories, reports the Telegraph. On the eve of the US President Donald Trump and Russia's Governor Vladimir Putin's summit in Alaska, diplomatic circles discussed the escalation of the positions of President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. As the Telegraph writes, with a link to European sources, Kiev is supposedly ready to consider a way to stop the combat actions with an actual confirmation of Russian control over the already occupied territories. That is, not with a legal confirmation, but with an actual one in Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson regions in Crimea. If you follow me, follow the negotiations and Ukrainian positions, then you, like me, have a question. And what is the news? Ukraine has long been standing for the world under the LBP with guarantees of not resumption of combat actions, and judging by the description of the telegram, its position has not changed at all. That is, no strengthening has occurred. Typical news from nothing, and this is a problem at all. People discuss everything. The official position of Kiev at the moment is to stop the fire of the LBP. It has been like this for a long time. There is no news about this. This position was finally confirmed at the meeting of the United States and Ukraine in Saudi Arabia at the beginning of the year. Are there known preliminary details of the meeting place of Putin and Trump, and is there really some new information? In general, Alaska is not a directly self-industrialized region of the United States, so there are more questions about this meeting than response. And here's the CNN reports where the president will meet in 2 days. Putin and Trump will meet at the military base Elmendorf-Richardson in the state of Alaska, writes the media. According to the TV channel, the organizers of the summit first chose Anchorage and then stopped at the unified base of the U.S. and the U.S. Army, Elmendorf-Richardson, on the northern edge of the city, because only it could meet the demands of security of the meeting. At the same time, the White House hoped to avoid the situation when Putin and the Russian delegation end up on the territory of the American military object, CNN notes, but apparently it did not work out. To be honest, it confuses me more and more. Well, that is, it is assumed that Mr. Shahmed, sitting in a bunker and forcing everyone to go through quarantine for 2 weeks, will not just fly to the United States, but fly to the United States to the military base. Of course, there's no doubt that the Americans can ensure the security of Putin and reduce the possibility of any non-staff situations with false bullets to about zero. Still, such actions of Putin are weak to fit his previous pattern of behavior. There are 2 days left until the meeting, and it is already almost inevitable. It is obvious that Putin sincerely believes that a personal meeting with Trump will allow him to powder the mind of the American president finally. That is, it makes him very beneficial. But I still can't imagine all this for myself. Sorry for me. Let's see. It didn't take long to wait, but on the one hand, the rational meeting, it seems inevitable. Everyone has confirmed everything, all the specific parameters are already prescribed. And on the other hand, we are talking about Putin. We are talking about Putin who will fly to the U.S. military base in the U.S. I don't know. Today, the video meeting of Trump and Zelensky will be held. It is clear that the relations between the American president and the leader of Ukraine are now again very close. As Trump publicly says that he will trade Ukrainian territories, and Zelensky publicly says that this will not happen. And I would like to hope that a miracle will happen again and Trump will get something from his wife which will make him stop playing Putin, but we are preparing, of course, for the worst. The European rearm program has started to bear fruit. European defense enterprises are expanding 3 times faster than before the beginning of the war in Ukraine, reports Financial Times. The enterprise takes more than 7 million square meters of industrial area. According to Tankers, this is a rearmament of a historical scale. The EU Defense Ministry reported to Financial Times that after the invasion of Moscow, the annual power of Europe in the production of ammunition has increased from 300,000 to about 2 million by the end of this year. Europe is increasingly understanding the danger coming from the Russian army and increasingly increasing its own efforts. There are pluses and minuses here. More precisely, this increase happens along different trajectories, and therefore, the problem that the European region historically has is speed. Well, that is, it is very, very slow. Now the 4th year of war is already going on, and only now the European forces have approached it in some way more or less adequate, although they still lag behind the same Russian ones, for example, by rank of nomenclature. At the same time, there is a plus of this European inertness. It is that when everything is signed, when everything is done, it is almost impossible to stop this machine. For example, in the first year of the war, the full-scale war, European contractors, they refused to expand the production line and said, "Here, the war will end now," and we have already expanded the production line, spending a lot of money. And you no longer need shells, and we will just remain in downsides. And there were long negotiations and long guarantees of long-term contracts, and therefore, in any case, Europe will increase the production of weapons. That is, this is already a track, this is the path from which Europe will not turn around, and this makes Europe more prepared and more protected from Russian aggression. Because where does Putin's regime exist? Russia is a threat to the whole world, and in particular, and to Europe in particular. Well, I think you see that there are more and more talks about how Russia can attack Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and lately, a few friends write, like Michael, tell me please, how much do you evaluate this possibility? Do you consider it existent, and so on? So of course there are concerns, and there is a reason for them. I believe that Vladimir Putin can try to do such things under certain conditions, and just if he is sure that Trump will not go to the support support of his NATO allies, including the Baltic countries, and if the Baltic countries are not ready for this invasion. Baltic countries are really not ready for this invasion, not because they are not ready, but because they are ready. That is, the strengthening of the border is carried out, the increasing one's own combat effectiveness is carried out, but very slowly, conditionally, taking one army corps now. Vladimir Putin has all the chances to reach some kind of capital from one of these countries. At the same time, in relation to Lithuania, it seems to me that these chances are less in relation to other attacks of Russia in relation to other countries a little more. This also has its own reasons, and not because I live in Lithuania, but rather the other way around. I live in Lithuania because I believe that the possibility of an attack on it is less, but we will talk to you in this separate video. I continue to prepare material accordingly on this topic. In any case, as we see, Europe is really getting more and more serious. Not the Russian threat getting more powerful, especially in the context of the inability to count on America as a reliable partner. And the American president is out of his mind, not even trying to understand what's going on, living in fantasy and reality where it's impossible to count on. He rejects even the words he says them first, then says them again, and never said them before. And we've already seen this many times, so it's impossible to count on Donald Trump. It's hard to count on stable supplies, including from allies, and the most stable thing the Ukrainian army has is the Ukrainian army. And now, as you can see, the situation is very difficult. Including the meeting of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and the possible ceasefire. If Trump manages to break through Putin, of course, the Russian army is giving way. This is such a specificity in any war. If you look there where there's no talk of the war until the victory end, there's always the same story. As soon as the peace is waging on the horizon, the sides begin to conduct more intense combat actions. Well, because they assume that specific combat actions here now will increase the positions on the negotiating track. And that's why, in my opinion, now Russia is very seriously trying to throw everything that is right now to improve its position. And therefore, now it is a very difficult situation for Ukrainian defenders, perhaps the most difficult thing in recent times. Therefore, it is very important to continue to support them. And today we will help the 3rd Assault Brigade, which also applied for your help, for the purchase of drones, for artillery intelligence, the 3rd Assault Brigade. Here is their appeal to you.
Слава Україні! Героям слава! Ми, артилерійська розвідка 3-ї окремої штурмової бригади, звертаємося до Майкла Сіднея Накі з проханням у допомозі у Аутел Evo Max 4N 2 штуки, які нам допоможуть нижчі безпосередньо.
Here is the QR code for Monobank in the description of Monobank, private, PayPal, Bitcoin, USDT, TRC20. That is, with CryptoShake as always, glad. Thank you all for the support. This is a real opportunity to help Ukrainian fighters preserve their lives and help them protect their country. This is the most direct help that there are consequences here and now, which has a direct contribution to what is happening. If you're thinking about how you can influence the situation here and now, then here is an example. Thank you very much to everyone who supports the Ukrainian army. Life literally depends on it. Well, we are moving on.
Продолжается украинская кампания ударов по российским нефтеперерабатывающим заводам. Волгоградские телеграм-каналы и база сообщили об атаке украинских беспилотников на нефтеперерабатывающий завод в Волгограде, в которой участвовали не менее 20 дронов. Последствия пока не уточняются. Глава области Андрей Бочаров в свою очередь сообщил, что обломки сбитого дрона упали на крышу 16-этажного дома в тракторозаводском районе на севере Волгограда. По словам главы региона, жители не пострадали.
So on the night of August 13, Ukrainian UAVs tried to attack an oil refinery in Sloviansk, Cuban, and Krasnodarsk. My Telegram channels fence work in the area of the Enterprise. The operational headquarters of Krai stated that a gas tanker fell on the territory of the oil refinery in Sloviansk, Cuban. Air defense equipment and Ukraine's security service for the second time in a week attacked the Shahed storage facility in Tatarstan, Russia. According to local residents, before that, local residents posted on social networks how Shahed-like drones flew over various regions of the region, and then one of them hit a Tatsiklad. The Tatsiklad is located in the Russian settlement of Kizlyou, Tatarstan Republic, 1,300 kilometers from Ukraine. The drones of the SBU Special Operations Center carried out a repeat strike on the logistical hub, where they are kept ready to use Shaheds, as well as foreign equipment to them, reported in the Ukrainian Security Service. The military reminds that the previous attack of long-range UAVs on this object of the Russian military-industrial complex occurred on August 9 of this year. Then, strike drones, Ludi, were used for the strike. In the recent pictures taken after the attack, it is clear that at the roof of the logistics center appeared at least 2 holes, one of which is noticeable more. One of yesterday's strikes into the Shahed storage terminal is recorded on the video. Assumption that it was shot by the employees of which were evacuated after the strikes. On the video, it is also clear that an unknown Shahed-like drone, which could fly about 1,300 kilometers, was used. One of the first recorded cases of use of such drones was July 4 of this year, when the optical mechanical factory in the city of Azov, Rostov region was attacked. Leaving on Monday, operators of the GUR attacked the Zavod in Orenburg, reports the Russian Ministry of Defense with a link to its own sources. Local residents reported a series of explosions near the plant. That evening, a section of the M5 Ural Federal Highway was blocked between the settlements of Perevolodski and Kholodnye Kluchi, which coincides with the location of the plant, writes the Russian Ministry of Defense. The Orenburg gel plant is the only plant in Russia that manufactures gel that is used in the production of missiles and in the air industry. The plant's website is indicated. Regions have yet to confirm information about a plant strike. On the eve of the governor's meeting in the Orenburg region, Yevgeny Sansov reported 2 downed buildings over the Orenburg region, but he didn't bring in any further details. The second day in a row, the authorities are stopping flights at the Orenburg airport, which confirms that the drone strike has occurred. Oil reception stopped after the drone strike, according to Bloomberg. This is the 3rd damaged Russian oil production plant in August. Now an enterprise with a capacity of 140,000 barrels per day can face a long-term shortage, which poses a threat to refineries. On the internal market in the middle of the year, Russia has once again struck the Ukrainian training ground. According to Ukrainian Armed Forces, such strikes are becoming less and less effective. But Russians don't stop it, because in their reports you can always write about hundreds or thousands of killed Bannerites. On the night of August 12, Russian troops delivered a missile strike on the territory of one of the training units of Ukraine's armed forces, Ukrainian military reported. The personnel was informed about the situation immediately after receiving the missile danger signal. Despite accepted security measures during the movement to the armored shelter, a group of servicemen got to the facility where cassettes and ammunition were hit. Another 12 servicemen applied for medical care, complaining about indigestion, injury, and severe stress. Emergency services are working fine. Emergency services provide all necessary medical care to the victims immediately. Security measures adopted after previous strikes are clearly working. Of course, even 1 dead is terrible, but security protocols clearly allowed significant reduction of damage to Russian strikes on the training grounds. But security measures adopted after previous strikes are clearly working. Of course, even 1 dead is terrible. But security protocols clearly allowed, increasing damage to Russian strikes on training ground. Sacrifice of the Russian offensive, as always, becomes residents of the frontline settlements. In Belozersk, 2 civilians died, including a 16-year-old young man. They were injured, the Donetsk Regional Prosecutor's Office reports. Belozersk is under the Dobropolye, the zone of the Russian breakthrough, which we talked about yesterday and will talk about today. 25th year, 2255, occupation troops made a blow to Belozersk, according to the prosecutor's office. Under the bombs of Fab 250, there was a residential neighborhood where peaceful residents were in their houses. A 43-year-old man and a woman of 34 years old died from body damage. In addition, 3 men were injured, 3 women, as well as a 16-year-old young man. The victim has been diagnosed with explosive mine, shrapnel brain injuries, headache, shrapnel injuries, cut wounds, fractures, contusion. They are provided with qualified help. 8 multi-story buildings and 6 cars were damaged in the strike sites. The General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces reported 2 border settlements in Sumy at once. The Ukrainian Defense Forces removed settlement points from Russian occupiers, including Stepno and Novokonstantinovka, which were once May 1 in Sumy region, according to the General Staff. Fighters of the 225th Separate Assault Regiment were actively pushing into enemy units outside Ukraine's state borders. Evil tongues like the Z-Channel War News remind me that neither Russian nor Ukrainian sources have reported about occupation of these villages by Russian troops, and believe that General Staff's reports are pointless anti-crisp compared to the events near Pokrovsk. But I'd note that the General Staff reported not about liberating settlements, but about clearing up those settlements, which could mean, for example, destroying small groups of Russian soldiers who defended the residential buildings, which at the time were so minor they didn't even give a reason to draw a gray zone there. Though of course this is an anti-crisis, but it's not without reason that it's based on real events. Meanwhile, according to Ukrainian intelligence, which voiced Volodymyr Zelensky, Russia seems to have finally buried its offensive plans for the Sumy direction, and is going to blow up the group gathered there on other sections of the front. Zelensky noted that about 15,000 personnel will be sent to the Zaporizhzhia direction, and about 7,000 to the Pokrovsk region, and about 5,000 to the Novopavlovsk region. Zelensky emphasized that these forces will include the most powerful Russian brigades previously deployed in the Kursk direction. If this happens, we will most likely see a decrease in the number of Russian attacks in this direction in the future, according to the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces. Let's watch. Yesterday in the report and in a separate video, I told you about a deep breakthrough of Russian armed forces towards Dobropolye near Pokrovsk. Since then, the situation on the ground has not undergone visible changes, but the breakthrough continues to be discussed as the main event on the front line for not even days, even weeks, even months. Ukrainian soldiers who expressed the situation in the most dark tons a day ago now write more optimistic posts. Several enemy groups are destroyed, which have been broken through and are written by the Ukrainian military author of the channel Bakhmutski Demon. They're slowly pushing back those who tried to secure themselves, which they did not expect. And this is how the situation of his colleague Stanislav Bunyatov now is characterized. The situation in the Druzhkov direction is unpleasant, but this wedge can be considered from another angle if you do not allow the Russian armed forces to expand the flanks. In any case, competent commanders took control over the direction. We will believe that they have enough resources, and it will be possible not only to cut logistics with the Russian forces in such a corridor, but also to destroy as many Russians as possible in it, hopefully Bunyatov. In the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces, they gave another calm post, but at the same time, they recognized the penetration of Russians about the same settlements, which they previously wrote about, and in deep state. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are taking active measures. They wrote in the General Staff to stop the enemy's advance towards Dobropolsk and Pokrovsk directions. Our units are conducting heavy defensive battles against the enemy's advancing forces. As soon as they reached Pokrovsk, the occupiers concentrated more than 110,000 people into the group in order to penetrate deep into our defenses. These invading forces act boldly. Despite losses, they try to infiltrate diversified and small infantry groups through our defensive positions. Specifically, several small groups have bypassed the enemy, and the Ukrainian defenders have made an attempt to advance toward the settlement Zolotoy Koloditsa. In addition, taking advantage of the local landscape, the diversified troops sneakily infiltrated the settlement. The funny, free, foreign Kucherov Yar. Part of the group has already been destroyed, the rest has been in the process of elimination. The operation is not simple but dynamic. However, the Defense Force is taking all necessary measures to identify and destroy enemy groups, in particular, by the decision of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, main commander, in order to increase the stability of the defense against the additional forces and means. An event has been scheduled to block the enemy group in a certain area. Reservoir units have already discovered the enemy and are having their first successes. Ambushes are being destroyed and captured. Ukraine's defenders are focused on achieving the goals set out. They hold their borders and need the support of the entire society to reflect new attempts at enemy offensives, the General Staff confirmed. And Vladimir Zelensky also spoke about the situation in this sector. He admitted that the direction of Dobropolye Kramatorsk is the most difficult for the Ukrainian Defense Force and provided such a description of the situation. What happened there? Groups of Russians made a move at a distance of about 10 kilometers at several points, all of them without equipment, only with firearms. Some have already been found, partially destroyed, partially captured. You will also find and destroy other people, Zelensky promised. His opinion about the situation was formulated by a number of analysts who are most aware of what is happening on the front line and at the same time do not have any reasons to intensify their description of the situation. So this is what Rubley wrote. It is important to start with the admit that we do not know much, so it is difficult to say for sure whether to count this as a breakthrough or just a penetration through Ukrainian lines. It is also difficult to predict how this will develop. This indicates Ukraine's vulnerability. The front line is in fact quite breaching, and often fewer than 10 Ukrainian soldiers are required for every kilometer of the front line, dependent on the area. Many Ukrainian brigades have adopted a different approach to defense, in which the infantry try to avoid fighting Russian infantry if necessary. Instead, they're relying on UAVs to stop Russian infantry, either in front of the front line or behind it. The majority of commanders approached by us estimated that 80–90% of Russian infantry losses lie with UAVs. They adopted this approach partially because Russia has improved the process of lightning at the tactical level. If Ukrainian infantry enters into battle with Russian, their positions will most likely be destroyed by FPV drones, mines, FPV of the airplane type, drones, bombers, artillery, or planned bombs. Any fixed position over the ground can be destroyed by consistent UAV strikes, so almost all defense positions on the contact line are in forest landings, forests, or basement houses and buildings. Earlier, Russian forces often made progress by using infantry to provoke fire, then destroying front positions due to fire impact. Earlier, Russian infantry focused on assaulting Ukrainian front positions, often gathered in front of them. But now they use the infiltration tactic. It's a sinker tactic, trying to get as deep as possible before being stopped. These tactics are often not too complex, and the level of training of soldiers is not high enough for them. Separate soldiers are appointed to the fundraising site across the front line, and several people are sent there alone or in pairs from different directions. This is designed to create panic among Ukrainian infantry on the front line and in other places. Penetration into Pokrovsk in the last month of the fighters of the 30th Motorized Rifle Brigade of Russian Federation became a change in the Russian tactical infiltration. It was carried out to great depth, was more difficult, and included serious planning. It was reported to me that the training was carried out in no less than 3 months. Specially motivated soldiers were selected, and after the front line passed, they were supplied by FPV drones. Their advance was slow and careful. They carefully selected routes with the best security and passed between the zones of responsibility of various Ukrainian brigades. About 30 people infiltrated the city and began to set up ambushes. At the end of the day, the infiltration in Pokrovsk did not achieve the goals of Russia. The main thing is that the brigades holding the front line did not leave their positions, despite infiltration. Other Ukrainian units were sent to clean the groups in Pokrovsk. However, this still required the deployment of other Ukrainian units and showed vulnerability in defense. The UAVs cannot find or destroy every Russian soldier during the use of such tactics, and Russia has achieved more success in striking Ukrainian UAV commanders. They often, in a week before the assault, introduce a Rubicon unit, which can temporarily decrease the capabilities of the brigades in the UAV sector. Since the UAVs play a main part in the Russian combat, this can be a decisive factor between failure and success of the attack. It seems that a similar approach was used in this case. The infiltration was carried out by the fighters of the 132nd Motorized Rifle Brigade of the DPR. They are real soldiers from the occupied territories who know the terrain better and can mask themselves. Their full scale of movement is unknown, but these groups penetrate more than 10 kilometers beyond the front line and possibly much further. It suggests that the operation was planned for a long time before the summit in Alaska. If the Ukrainian infantry continues to hold their positions and other units will be able to clean these groups, then this will not be a breakthrough. These groups do not need to demonstrate the growth of territorial control of Russia, but they can create problems in the rear. Deep infiltration will also force the Ukrainian unit to strengthen their defense measures and possibly move certain supply units back, including the UAV command, which makes it more difficult for the defense. In Ukraine's broader plan, it will be necessary to pay more attention to the forces of rapid response, prepared to counter the sabotage groups, taking into account the infantry shortage at the front. Use of Russia's infiltration tactics and the fact that Ukrainian infantry often doesn't fight the Russian one also means that it is more and more difficult for the maps to transfer the situation effectively. The confirmation of the control line becomes a matter of assessment, and the front more or less remains the expanded gray zone. It's not yet clear whether Russia can take advantage of this development or create conditions for effective use of armored vehicles. Infiltration in Pokrovsk and eastern Zaporizhzhia shows that Russia continues to adapt to use Ukraine's vulnerabilities. Perhaps they will try to infiltrate similar areas in Kharkiv and Sumy regions or other parts of the front. It is still extremely important for Ukraine to solve its lack of a problem, its old problem with its lack of a personnel, summarizes Rubley. With its considerations of a bit more general nature, analyst Michael Kaufman shared, writing the following: the advance of Russia in the Zaporizhzhia area reflect a broader problem dynamic, characteristic of the lack of single defense lines and small units holding positions, which can lead to a slow moving, and then to a sudden change in the front line. The situation is still developing and we'll hope it won't lead to a major operational breakthrough, but it's a sign of difficulty and a problem many people talk about. I covered them in detail in a long thread 2 weeks ago. Movements around Pokrovsk were previously explained by actions of Russian diversification and reconnaissance groups, but often it's just small assault groups of 2, 4, 6 people or groups on buggy motorcycles, which can bypass dispersed defense if they manage to pass through the drone cover zone. The defense line reminds more of a chain of posts of 2 to 3 people. A significant part of it is the gray zone, which covers the strike zone, covering both forward and behind them. Armed assault groups are trying to pass through these positions and move further. Ukraine is holding the front with a shortage of infantry and the lack of reserves, relying on drone units. This gave time, but not enough to stabilize the front or compensate for more fundamental problems in the control of forces and their replenishment. This recent advance apparently is made of infantry and light motor groups. Russian troops this year advanced faster with much less use of armored vehicles, so the presence or absence of armored vehicles cannot be considered the main indicators. This breakthrough took place through a defensive line, which on the map can mean little, because this is not a war of separate trenches with infantry, but of the network of well-masking positions for equipment and small infantry groups with big gaps between them. The prepared fortification and minefields still hold back the advance. Their approach to the map is useful, but the lines on the map can create misjudged expectations, taking into account the current dynamics of combat actions. In this way, multiple groups of 2 to 3 people can pass through the dispersed defense line, as well as groups on buggy or motorcycles, if they are not intercepted by strike zones around the posts or if Ukrainian drone commands are suppressed. In this direction, the Russian forces have also actively used the planned bombs of the MPT to create conditions for breaking through. Despite the periodically emerging rumors, their effectiveness has significantly not decreased. There are other sources that perform better daily reports and updates. It's enough to say that the information comes with delay, there are rumors going around, but the situation is most likely worse than is visible on the deep state map. It is also important to note a wider problem policy is not a step back even if there are a lack of resources in unfavorable places, and a threat to the environment, instead of replacing the space for wounding the enemy or providing the commanders with the opportunity to conduct mobile defense. Ukrainian units are often forced to hold unfavorable positions where the elastic defense is located behind their pickets, not forward. This also leads to false reports, distrust, and information distorted in the system. Another problem is expensive counterattacks to return lost positions, including those that were initially unfavorable, instead of focusing on stabilizing the front. This has led to losses among the decreasing infantry composition of the army. As Tatarigami writes, a collapse of the front is not the same as a tactical breakthrough or bridge. Does this advance lead to a collapse if the stabilization actions are wrong? Yes, the situation can deteriorate, but it is too early to make such a conclusion for now. The defense of existing retreats will become even more difficult, and this breakthrough can accelerate the retreat from these positions. Ukrainian armed forces are redeploying units to delay the advance, but this is an anxiety signal. Further development could negatively affect the defense of Donetsk, putting Druzhkovka under threat, then Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, especially considering the northeastern Leman's offensive lines. In the end, it remains unclear how the situation will develop over the next several days, but this is another sign that unmanned units, despite their full critical importance for defense, cannot fully compensate for the found problems or stabilize them. Front by itself, Ukrainian analyst Tatarigami is developing his opinion that the breakthrough is most likely scheduled for Putin and Trump's next negotiations. Here, that's what he writes. This may be the most beneficial moment for Russia, which means that we're already watching or soon going to see its peak of efforts. The main reason is the coming August 15, the negotiations between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Putin is almost certainly trying to create as unfavorable conditions for Ukrainian troops as possible to intensify his positions behind the table of negotiations. Considering Russia's recent successes near Pokrovsk, Putin may be trying to show Trump that Russia is close to the Ukrainian army's encirclement. Earlier this year, Trump wrote that Russians surrounded Ukrainian troops in Kursk after previous discussions with Putin, likely repeating proofs given to him. It's unclear whether all this will pay off, including the meeting itself, but there's no doubt that Russian troops will try to capture as much territory as possible. There are few reasons now to keep reserves alive. This is Russia's best political moment to demonstrate large advances. As a result, I come to the conclusion, he writes, that we are likely watching the peak of Russia's offensive capabilities near Pokrovsk. On the 15th of August, we'll see if Russia has anything else or if it has the full power of its largest group on the entire front. While the situation for the rest of the civilians in Sumy remains, Pokrovsk continues to deteriorate. The last stores in the city have been shut. Meanwhile, about 1,300 people remain in it, said the GVA head Sergei Dobryak on TV Marathon. According to him, it is almost impossible to enter the city due to constant shelling, and the evacuation is very complicated. A month ago, Pokrovsk managed to start humanitarian aid, and the local people still have supplies. They won't have enough of them for a long time. That's why military people are now helping with supplies, and they're also involved in evacuating the population, he noted. There's no power supply like in the centralized Vodosnabzhnev in the city since the end of December 2024. The point in the water withdrawal area worked there until last week, but it won't be possible to restore it after another strike. Despite this, the citizens still have more than 300 sources of water, Dobryak noted. Let's not forget that it is Russia that makes the residents of peaceful Ukrainian cities live, not live, but survive. And according to experience, if the city is going to be occupied, then the humanitarian situation there will hardly improve. Even shelling will not stop, but will simply become more or less dangerous for the peaceful population, because Ukraine will be the one to destroy them. The situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction is developing not in a very pleasant way for the Russians. Ukrainian defenders managed to knock out the enemy in Stepnohirsk, where Russian fighters tried to secure themselves, Deep State reports. The 210th Separate Assault Regiment, together with the neighboring units, cleared the southern outskirts of Stepnohirsk, where the Russians had previously infiltrated, analysts report. The Ukrainian Defense Forces finally purged Stepnohirsk from the Russian Armed Forces group, which accumulated on the southern outskirts and tried to secure themselves. Thanking a consistent work of the 210th SPG and neighboring units, it was possible to knock out the remnants of the enemy and focus on strengthening and restoring positions, the authors of the project report. The Russian offensive in this direction still performs its role, distracted Ukrainian units from other parts of the front. It is at least possible to forget about the threat to Zaporizhzhia in the near future. If not to forget, then to reduce this risk, to count this risk as reduced. According to the Ukrainian resource Okogorovo, based on the Deep State map within the past week from August 4 to 10, the Russian armed forces took 144 SQ km, advancing an average of 21 SQ km per day. If we count the previous 3 weeks, the Russian advance did not exceed 14 SQ km per day. Let's see if this trend remains, but even if so, it does not really stand out from the previous months of the Russian offensive. In the case of the Russian exit to operational space and the achievements of operational success, we would see completely different numbers, and this has not yet occurred even in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russian armed forces are now concentration all their efforts. Vladimir Zelensky also brought the statistics. This is what the president of Ukraine told journalists. As for the losses, I will give an example of yesterday, overall about this way. Russians 1,000 losses per day. This is 500 killed and 500 wounded. I'm not now saying that there are 10 prisoners of anti-terrorism, more precisely 968 losses. Russia has killed 531 and 428 wounded 9 prisoners. We, that is, the Ukrainian army, have 340 losses per day. 18 200s, 243 300s, 79 without a trace of missing people, about 1 to 3, that is, losses are 3 times more than in Russia. Turns out that the ratio of killed and injured in the Russian armed forces now is more than 1 to 1. A monstrous statistic that shows how bad everything in the Russian army is with the evacuation of injured and medical care, if you accept that most of the missing Ukrainian defenders are actually dying. But the death does not manage to be quickly confirmed because the battlefield is most often left behind by the Russians. Then it turns out that in the Ukrainian side, the ratio of killed and injured is about 1 to 3. This is also not a very pleasant comparison, and at the level of the Second World War, but if we take into account that the Russians also use drones more and more often, then it is the duty of Ukrainian doctors and evacuation groups to achieve such indicators itself. Also, Zelensky stated that the comparison in artillery, apparently it's about the number of shots shot daily, now is 1 to 2 and 4 to the side of the enemy, that is, Russia is 2 and 4 times more likely to shoot artillery shells. Drones FPV are 1 to 1 to 4 in our favor, the president added. There's not enough money for drones, so for now 1 to 1 to 4, although we believe that 1 to 2.5 we can easily hold in our favor. Even 1 to 4 could be in our favor, but we are looking for funding from European partners. We will hope that funding will be found, because Ukraine needs to stay sharp ahead of drones and increase the available explosion, since the Russian armed forces significantly surpass the Ukrainian defense force in everything else. The State Secretary of the United States, Marco Rubio, shared his statistics, and she is insane. Here is the honest one. Trump used to figure out this for us, but here it's already Marco Rubio. He doesn't care about any beep. He told TV host Seed Rosenberger that Russians lost 60,000 killed over the past month. You know me, I'm openly open to any opinion, but it's nonsense. If you extrapolate the Zelensky number, it's not hard to count. It's almost 4 times more than all Russian losses killed over the past month, 2 times more than total Russian armed forces losses killed and wounded, and about 1.5 times more than all losses of both sides of the conflict over the past month. Only the years that happened to American intelligence or with the memory of Rubio remain, and it should be noted that the American administration hardly can take adequate decisions, operating so far from the reality of the numbers. That is, once again, this number, it is, of course, in plus Ukraine in the eyes of the Americans, but it is madness. This is not true. This is 100% not true. There are no 60,000 killed in a month. Like, this is nonsense. It is not clear from where it came from. If we take the numbers of Zelensky's Russian losses as a basis, and we see that they are similar to what the analysts give, then still, Russian losses, at least killed, will be much lower than the number of reinforcements coming to the Russian army, unfortunately. However, the fact is not only in the number, but also as these reinforcements. If I click on the Z authors, the last aspect would pay attention to Ivan Filippov, the author of the channel on the Western Front, without changes. I want to talk about sad but true moments, writes the Z channel Pioner Zapas. I want to touch on those who have nothing to lose, who, from 50 years and above, have half of their life propelling alcohol or something else. I and other comrade commanders talk to them and they ask themselves, why are you coming here? You are talking about the Buza and you cannot pass 100 meters. And the answer is striking. They say, for the family to leave money. Well, that is, you understand the reason, right? Is it good or bad? It is good that they think about their family. It is bad that they themselves do not understand that normal guys who are with them in one assault group can die because of them. Evacuation groups are dying who are trying to get their wounded out. Such combat grandfathers who hardly walk are a load that drags to the bottom of the combat groups. They often cannot simply reach the point where it is required. But here are no more questions for them, but for those who get such people in general and spread them nowhere and on the very front line of the assault. Why and for what you are doing this, and to be considered that quite a few volunteers were recruited, it is better to take fewer but high-quality guys. The cost will be much higher, the author of the channel advises. You remember how Victor Supel war is the case of young people, writes the Z-writer Alexei Sukonkin. He was 1,000 times right. The great homeland was carried out on the shoulders of young people. Afghanistan and Chechnya too. I even remember that during the war in Afghanistan, the people over 35 years old did not recommend mountains for combat tasks, since at this age most people, even those with good physical form, will represent a shell for the team in certain conditions. Quite recently, the musical group Wagner, represented by Russia's interests in Levant, it was believed that 45 years old is already the age at which it is not quite convenient to fight. The exemptions were made only for very valuable specialists. In the Project K, Prigorshine gained people under 50 years of age with rare exemptions when a person demonstrated a high level of physical training. However, we do not see anything like this now. Seeking to report to the president for the number of volunteers accepted for service, the contract is with everyone who expresses their intention to be in the army. The motives of these people are clear. They are represented by the banners in any settlement in our vast homeland. But the quality of this replenishment, he writes, my personal opinion about the quality of this replenishment is confirmed by the military themselves. At the training periods at the front, I see a lot of old people, many of which, in addition, have actively friended Satan and other means of bringing themselves to a changed state in their entire life. I personally observed the situation when these volunteers, wearing armor and equipment, can't take a step not to act actively. The instructors tried to teach them something for no reason. The age and background do not allow them to secure even the most fundamental knowledge. These guys who train volunteers, mostly veterans of the SVO, sometimes just let their hands go when they see complete unwillingness to master war science that can save these novobrants of life. And they go into assault where they are not aware of the situation, are not able to do something useful for the purpose of the assault, eventually sacrificing their lives for no reason, and then dying in their sleep group by pulling their bodies out. I may be sharp, but sorry, it's not clear, writes the Z channel. The term 100 novobrants has long been not the official term of the 100 prepared soldiers. In the period of mobilization, when the army turned out to be a part of the entire society, the percent of competent fighters was much higher than we have now. Something tells me that this focus is needed in repeat if we on a breakthrough in this strange war. It's considered by Konkin. The last day in connection with the events near Pokrovsk, we hear a lot from you about the Russian tactic of infiltration by small groups through the Ukrainian defense line. The Ukrainian channel, Via Victis, described in detail how it works. The line of combat contact, writes the author of the channel, in the form in which we understood it before, stopped existing. The Russians successfully infiltrate kilometers deep into the Ukrainian defense forces. The positions of Ukrainian and Russian forces are chaotically mixed in the area. However, this is not the result of the genius of Russian command and the inviolability of the Russian army, but a successful tactical innovation, multiplied by the incompetence of the Ukrainian army and the leadership responsible for the separate areas of the defense. It looks like this: the Russians shoot masked heat-resistant ponchos on the ground, cool them, and then move towards them at night with 2 people. Almost every movement between positions is controlled step by step. The officer of the command gives us specific orders, accompanied by drones and watching their masked. In the event of a danger, the group lies on the ground and covers itself with a paunch. They mostly find themselves when moving across the fields. In the forests and in the settlement points, the surveillance is extremely difficult. They go lightly, then reach the endpoints of some deep border, and there they lie, setting ambushes for the defense forces. Next, new groups are being pulled along the executed name of the route. Logistics is provided by flashlights, truck wings deliver a bit of provision, new batteries to radio stations. Predictions are usually not taken. It is difficult to put into the rear. Peaceful residents are destroyed on the way forward to prevent the spread of information about routes and positions. To reduce the risk of discovery, equipment is used without a sound shooting. Thus, after the period when UAVs destroyed the maneuvered war and the tactic of small infantry groups, the war again twisted around maneuvers, only now with shooting twos. And accordingly, around their hidden movements, collects infiltration as well as assault cleaning positions. We, as always, do not adapt quite quickly to the change, and, as a result, we are hit hard. But like any tactic of the maneuvered war, it faces the problems of stretched logistics in the area of the breakthrough. After all, the groups are advancing while there is an opportunity. They risk being cut off in the depth of Ukrainian order and staying without a drop of water or fire support. Therefore, there is again a need in the depth of defense in the second and third borders, as well as in the groups of quick response, which will clean cut-off points and cover the identified routes. Another more sharp thing is the need for centralization of control, concentration of funds on the selected area, support for continuous monitoring of the storage zone, and the advance of the engineering barriers. Considering the depth of some breakthroughs, we can even remember the fight with the support of armored vehicles. What is important is the readiness of infantry to assault and defense of fortification buildings. There is a meaning in the similar use of Russian armed forces tactics. The association of it with extremely high losses is a result of the Russians' weakness in planning and chronic unrealistic tasks, which they are not able to use reasonably in the advantage of the resources, and ultimately their waste, which has already occurred with armored vehicles on Russian storage bases. In the right hands, this tactic could facilitate the restoration of lost positions and the exhaustion of Russian forces, for example, under the conditions of its application to the weather conditions. The author of the channel advises, having in mind that such a leak into the non-flying weather for drones will be accompanied by fewer losses. In general, it is obvious that the war continues to change in our eyes. Both sides are trying to adapt to the new tactic of the enemy, and whoever does it faster will get an advantage. If Ukraine does not now develop and does not introduce effective countermeasures against the Russian tactic of infiltration, then in the future we will see the same breakthroughs or, more likely, passages or even crawls. One of the reasons for the recent successes of Russian armed forces on the front is considered to be the development and use of Russian drones, and the Russian unmanned tactic continues to develop. This is what the Ukrainian military author channel officer is telling about. Lately, mostly in the Konstantinovsk direction, Russians have been conducting FPV surveillance using drones on optical windows, periodically flying logistical roads on the area and the street of the same rank on the tree level in residential buildings. The number of drones is so large that they can allow themselves to send FPVs with optics to periodically surveillance, not in non-stop mode like the FPVs on the radio control, but even such a tactic gives a result. Timeless image quality allows you to normally monitor and hit targets, so in fact they are just coming at our armored vehicles, cars, and ground-based systems. In addition, there is periodically intelligence of entire sectors about the topic of strike if they come across a target. It is quite difficult to counter such a tactic, since the FPVs being hunt down on optics, which can only be visually observed, are not grateful for the fact. All that remains is to determine Russian operators' positions and strike them, in the principle of striking conscripts, not shooting. I tell you regularly that the Russian leadership considers the wounded military to be lost of material. It wasn't me who came up with it, as the soldiers themselves and their relatives say. As long as you're healthy, as long as you're a strong man, and when they need to sign a defense contract with the Ministry of Defense, they need you. As soon as you lose your health, you're lost of material and can be thrown into the dumpster. Well, Sergei Pasat apparently is the hospital where such things are being used, which are no longer useful in the service. Sister of the deceased military officer, Sezov Oleg of the regular 88th Motorized Rifle Brigade, Unit 26388, who died after being treated in the hospital, published a new video address, in which he told about the course of check-in at the 5th FGBU of the VMAT name of the Veshchevskaya Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. In March 2025, Olga Nikolaevna reported that a military prosecutor's office was conducting a check-in at the 5th branch of the Sergei Pasat unit. However, it did not bring any results. In April, she received a response from the prosecutor's office, but her requests were ignored. On April 11, 1925, the woman did not write down any new requests, but she continued to achieve justice and to bring to justice those who considered his brother to be guilty of death. Olga Nikolaevna has been trying to get punishment for more than half a year for being reckless about the death of Sisova ON. But in July 1925, she received a response from the Russian Ministry of Defense for the subscription of the head of the First Command, the deputy to the head of the main military command, A. Sergovintsevo. In these documents, it is indicated that internal control events were carried out. The violation is not revealed. Moreover, they include an accusation against the relatives of Anaslyshev that they were taken to a hospital or could harm Sasev. This story will not end. I do not care that they answer or that they will no longer consider my statements. I will still write them. I will take them out with my statements. The sister of a serviceman said, Sasev suffered a serious injury in March 2024, but after treatment in the branch number 5 of the name of Vishnevsky, Oleg died. In fact, this is waiting for most Russian soldiers in these assaults, so never go to the Russian army because your sister will run and complains, and it will not help you in any way. It is not you who should take the cross, it is not her who should make peace with the incident, avoid the Russian army in all available ways. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.